Welcome to Restoria. I'm Edward, and this is your quiet place for gentle bedtime stories. Get comfortable, take a breath, and let the story ease you into sleep. Somewhere small in ours. The folder had been on the kitchen table for 3 weeks. It was an ordinary manila folder, the kind with a brass fastener at the top, soft at the corners from being opened and closed so many times. Inside it were printed photographs, handwritten notes, a few torn pages from a magazine, and a list of addresses written in Lena's careful, looping hand. Milo had added his own notes in the margins, smaller and more hurried, little arrows pointing to things he liked, small crosses next to the ones that felt wrong without quite being able to say why. They had started the folder in early autumn, when the idea was still new and slightly thrilling in the way new ideas are before they have been tested. The leaves had still been on the trees then, copper and orange and a tired kind of gold, and the city outside the apartment windows had smelled of damp stone and wood smoke carried in from somewhere to the north. Now the season had turned and the folder had grown soft and familiar, and the idea inside it had become something quieter and more serious. Something they carried with them through ordinary days. The smell of coffee moved through the apartment each morning like a warm hand. Lena made it first, always, before Milo was properly awake. And the sound of the grinder and then the slow drip of the machine would reach him through the bedroom wall and pull him gently toward the day. That smell, rich and a little bitter, dark roasted and deeply familiar, was the first thing every morning. It had been the first thing for 4 years. It would be the first thing in the new place, too, whenever the new place came. They had agreed on that without ever quite saying so. Outside the apartment windows, the city moved at its usual pace. Buses, voices, the low percussion of a street being repaired 2 blocks over, a sound that had been going on for so long they had stopped registering it as noise. They loved the apartment in the way you love something you are also ready to leave. It had been good to them, the tall ceilings, the long windows, the neighbors who played piano on Sunday evenings and whose music moved through the walls like something borrowed. But fine was no longer quite enough, and they both felt it, and so the folder sat on the table and they kept looking. The first place they visited was in a village about an hour north, down a lane so narrow the hedges brushed both sides of the car as they drove slowly along it. Milo kept his speed down and Lena had the folder on her lap, the photograph of this one on top, and she held it up against the actual view as they turned into the field lane and said quietly that it looked right. It did look right, from a distance. Pale wood cladding, a roof that curved slightly like a loaf of bread, a small porch with 2 steps and a green painted door, a stand of birch trees at the back catching the low afternoon light. The air smelled of mud and something faintly smoky from a farm beyond the trees, and the sky was the pale, washed blue of a November afternoon, clear and cold and very still. Their breath showed as small clouds. Lena crossed the field toward the porch with her coat pulled in at the collar, and Milo followed. And for a moment the whole thing felt possible in a very immediate way. Inside, the space was smaller than the photographs had suggested. Not unpleasantly so, but noticeably. The ceilings were low and the windows deep set, and the light came in at an angle that turned everything golden and slightly slow, the way late afternoon light does when it has to work to get through. The sleeping loft was reached by a wooden ladder, the rungs worn smooth from use, and the kitchen was a single counter with 2 shelves above it and a narrow sink whose window looked out into the birch trees. Lena stood at it and looked out for a while. The trees stood very still. The ladder would get old, Milo said from the foot of it, looking up. He said it the way you say a thing when you're not really speaking to anyone, just putting a feeling into words so it can exist outside you. Lena didn't answer. She ran her hand along the window ledge, feeling the grain of the wood beneath her fingers. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun that had been on it all day. She let her hand rest there. It wasn't the one. They both knew it on the drive back, the folder open on Lena's lap, the next address already considered. They didn't say it was not the one, because there was no need to say it. The knowing was already there, easy and shared, like most of the things between them. The second was 2 hours west, and they made a day of it. They left early, while the morning was still gray and the roads were quiet, and stopped for breakfast at a small cafe with fogged windows and a handwritten menu on a board and a smell of bacon and warm bread that met them at the door. They took a table by the window and ordered eggs and toast and sat with their coats still on, watching the village outside wake up in its slow Saturday way. A postman, a dog being walked with great purpose by a small child, the baker across the road unlocking a door and propping it open to let the morning in. The cafe grew warm while they ate, the kind of warmth that builds gradually in a small room full of people eating breakfast, that rises from coats and cups and conversation until the windows steam at the corners and you forget the cold outside was ever real. They lingered over a second cup of tea, unhurried, watching the village go about itself. The second tiny home sat on a small plot beside an orchard, the apple trees bare and silver in the winter light, their branches crossing against the sky in precise and complicated patterns. The home itself was newer than the first, cleaner lined, built on a trailer frame with a clever little fold-down desk, positioned by the largest window, and a bathroom that had, to Lena's genuine surprise, a proper bathtub fitted into it. She laughed when she saw it, a real laugh, low and warm, and Milo came to look and nodded slowly at the engineering of it. the way the tub sat at an angle to allow for the slanting wall above. It was a small and pleasing thing. The timber inside smelled of fresh wood and linseed oil, a clean working smell that settled something in both of them. The ceilings felt higher, or gave that impression, and the windows were well placed, the light moving through them easily. But the plot was shared with 3 other tiny homes arranged close together, their porches nearly touching, and standing on the step outside, Milo could hear the couple next door moving through their place. The soft knock of a cupboard, a voice, low and indistinct, the press of a floorboard. He stood there for a moment, listening without meaning to. The quiet they were looking for was a specific kind. Not emptiness, not isolation, but the quiet that comes when the world has a little space around it. When sound arrives from a distance rather than through a wall. This was not that. This quiet had edges. They drove home in the dark, the heater running low and steady, the radio set to something instrumental that neither of them had chosen, just something that was there and wasn't nothing. Lena slept somewhere along the motorway, her head tilted against the window, and Milo drove and watched the orange motorway lights pass overhead in their steady rhythm, one and then another and then another. The folder was on the back seat, patient as it always was. They found the third in a different way, not from a website or a listing, but from a small printed card on a board outside a village post office, handwritten address and a pencil-drawn map and a phone number in neat black ink. Milo had photographed it almost by chance while looking for something else, and that evening he showed it to Lena, and she read it twice and said they should go and see. So they went. A Saturday morning in early December, the frost still hard on the fields, the sky clean and very pale and very high. They drove with the hand-drawn map on Lena's phone, following a country road that narrowed gradually until it was little more than a lane, and then a track between 2 open fields at the end of which sat a low stone wall and a gate that needed lifting slightly to open. Beyond the gate, a short stretch of gravel led to a small timber structure with a corrugated metal roof, the color of old pewter, and a stovepipe rising from one end. There was a thin thread of smoke from the stovepipe. Not much, just the last of something that had burned down overnight, rising straight up in the still air and then dissolving quietly into the sky above. The fields on either side stretched away flat and pale, the grass silver at the tips with frost. A wood pigeon called from somewhere out of sight, a low and round and unhurried sound. Then nothing, just the sound of their feet on the gravel as they walked toward the door. Inside, the wood smoke was warm and dry and deep in the air. The stove in the corner was small and cast iron, cold now but still holding a faint warmth when Milo pressed his palm to its side. The interior was a single long room. the far end raised on a low platform, not a loft, but a gentle step up, and the sleeping area there had built-in drawers beneath the bed frame and a low window above where a pillow would sit that looked out over the field beyond. The light through it was white and soft, a winter light, the kind that asks nothing of you. Along one wall the kitchen ran, a gas hob with 2 burners, a deep ceramic sink with a wooden draining board worn pale and smooth from long use, a shelf above with hooks beneath it. Above the sink, a window, and through the window, the field, and beyond the field, a low ridge where a line of willows stood bare and silver, and above them, a sky that went on for a very long way. Lena stood at that window. She stood there for a long time without speaking, her hands resting on the wooden draining board. Milo sat on the step up to the sleeping platform and watched her watching the willows, and the stove ticked softly as whatever heat remained in it continued to find its way out through the iron, and outside the wood pigeon called once more. 2 notes, round and soft. And then there was nothing. Just the light through the window, just the willows, just the pale winter sky above them. The coffee would be good here, Lena said. Her voice came out quiet and unhurried, as though the room had asked her to speak gently in it. She was still looking at the willows, her hands still resting on the worn wood of the draining board. Milo looked at the window above the sink, at the line of willows on the ridge, at the field between. He nodded once, slowly. The folder, sitting in the car outside on the back seat, felt already finished, already done. Its brass fastener closed. They moved in on a Saturday in early December, when the days were at their shortest and the afternoon light came low and amber and was gone by 4. In the weeks before, they had given away a great deal more than they expected. Boxes of things carried down the apartment stairs over several weekends, loaded into a van that went to various places. Friends' houses, a charity shop on the high street, a skip in the car park that gradually filled with the accumulated weight of 4 years in a space that had been large enough to hold things without you noticing them. Each box that left felt like something released. Each emptied shelf felt like a breath taken fully. What remained fit into the back of Milo's car and 2 trips with a small rented trailer. It was not much. It was exactly enough. The first thing Lena carried inside was the coffee maker. Still in its box, held against her coat, she walked up the gravel track and through the door and set it on the wooden draining board before anything else was in place, before the bed had been made or the rug unrolled or the brass lamp plugged in anywhere. Milo saw her do it and said nothing, just smiled at the rightness of it, the coffee maker finding its window before anything else found its place. The day was spent in the particular pleasant tiredness that comes from useful work. Boxes opened on the floor and gone through, Things placed on shelves and surfaces. Things moved when the first position felt wrong. Things placed again when the second felt better. The cast iron stove was lit in the early afternoon, coaxed with newspaper and thin pieces of split wood, and then fed gradually as the iron began to warm. There was a smell at first of old dust burning off the cold metal, and then the smell changed and became cleaner and drier, became simply the smell of warmth, of a fire going in a small room on a cold December day. Milo stood in front of it with his coat still on and let the heat come to him slowly. By late afternoon, the light outside was going. December light goes quickly, the sky shifting from blue to gray to a deep and even navy in less than an hour, and the windows caught the interior and held it back at them, their own small reflections, warm and amber in the glass. Milo hung the brass lamp over the kitchen counter, the one they had carried from the apartment, and it threw a circle of amber light that reached the table and softened toward the edges. Lena stood back and looked at it. The lamp in its circle of light, the stove ticking gently in its corner, the wooden draining board with the coffee maker sitting on it. She said quietly that it was right. They ate at the small table Milo had set under the window. Simple pasta with garlic and oil and a little cheese. The kind of meal that asks nothing of you and gives back everything it can. Outside, the fields had gone to dark, and the willows on the ridge were just a suggestion, a darker line against the navy sky. The stove made its quiet ticking sound as the iron warmed through. The lamp above the counter held its steady amber light. Milo poured 2 small glasses of something red and warm, and they sat with their coats still half on because the room was still finding its warmth, still learning how to hold it. And outside, the December wind moved across the fields in long, low waves, but inside the air was still. They did not talk much over dinner. There was nothing that needed saying. The warmth said it. The smallness said it. The lamp and the stove and the draining board and the dark fields beyond the window said it more clearly than words would have. Lena looked at the willows on the ridge, invisible now, out there somewhere in the dark. Milo looked at Lena. The stove settled with a soft sound. Outside, the night went on being cold and still. In the days that followed, the place became theirs in the small and gradual ways that always matter more than the large ones. A row of hooks beside the door for coats and bags and the long wool scarf Lena wore all winter hung there the first morning and never moved. A piece of driftwood she had kept from a beach trip 3 summers before, carried through 2 apartments and finally set along the window ledge above the stove, where it looked immediately as though it had always been. 2 mugs left on the draining board instead of put away. A small rug, deep red and slightly worn at the center, placed in front of the stove so that standing there in the morning was soft underfoot instead of cold. Milo found a narrow second-hand bookshelf that fit exactly in the gap between the kitchen counter and the bathroom door, a fit so precise it seemed designed rather than found. He spent a quiet afternoon arranging books on it, not by any system, just in the order they seemed to want to go. And when it was done, he stood back and it looked like a bookshelf that had always been there. Lena set a plant on the ledge above the sink, a small trailing thing in a terracotta pot she had been keeping on the apartment windowsill for 2 years, and within a day it had turned toward the winter light as though it had been waiting for exactly this window and this angle and this cool white morning glow. The cast iron stove became the center of the place in the way a stove always becomes the center of a small room, not by being the largest thing or the most impressive, but simply by being the warmest. In the evenings they fed it carefully, one small log at a time, and it gave back a heat that was dry and even and deep, the kind of warmth that finds the tension in your shoulders and releases it without making a point of it. They would sit after dinner on the small sofa they had squeezed against the far wall, Lena at one end and Milo at the other, their feet overlapping in the middle in a way that left no room for anything but closeness. The stove ticked and breathed. Outside, the December wind moved across the fields, and the grass bent, and the stone wall held, and inside the air was still and warm. The coffee smell came each morning like the return of something reliable. Lena made it first, always. The grinder ran its brief rattling run, and then the machine began its slow drip, and the smell moved through the single room in a way it never had in the apartment, where it had to travel down a hall and around a corner and through a door. Here the room was one room, and the smell arrived everywhere at once, reaching the sleeping platform where Milo lay with the duvet heavy over him and the low window above showing him a pale and early sky. He would lie and let it come to him, not moving yet, just listening to the small sounds of Lena in the kitchen, the soft knock of a mug on the draining board, the quiet running of the tap, her unhurried morning steps on the floor below. Outside the low window, the willows on the ridge were the first things to catch the morning light. They would shift from dark to silver to a faint warm gold as the sun came up over the field, and Milo would watch this without moving, the pillow cool at his cheek, the duvet warm and heavy, the smell of coffee arriving from below like a second greeting, alongside the first one the willows always gave. Some mornings a mist lay in the low parts of the field, white and completely still, and the willows stood above it in their bare winter way. Some mornings the frost was back, hard and bright, and the whole field glittered briefly before the sun took it. Lena would bring his coffee up the step to the platform without being asked. She would set the mug on the floor beside the bed, close enough for him to reach without sitting up, and then she would go back down to the kitchen and lean against the counter with her own mug and look out at the willows. For a while they were both looking at the same willows from different angles, from the platform and from the kitchen. The same low ridge, the same bare silver branches, the same pale sky above. It was a small and daily thing, and it was good. On weekends they walked, not far, and not with any destination, just along the track and through the gate at the far end of the field and up the gentle slope to where the willows ran along the ridge. From up there you could see a long way east, the fields running out to a far line of mixed woodland, the gray suggestion of a village spire, a water tower on the horizon pale against the sky. And behind them, below, the small pewter roof of their home with the stovepipe rising from it and, on cold mornings, a thin thread of smoke going straight up into the still air. From the ridge it looked very small and solid and quietly there, as if it had always been in that field corner and always would be. Milo liked looking at it from the ridge. From up there it was just a shape, a roof and four walls, something a child might draw with a crayon on a piece of paper. And yet inside it was the stove and the lamp and the draining board and the mugs and the bookshelf and the rug and the linen above the platform and the smell of coffee that arrived every morning. Inside it was entirely enough. From the ridge you could see clearly how small enough could be. How small enough was not a lesser thing. It was, in its own way, a more precise thing, a thing with no extra space in it, no room for anything that did not belong. They stood on the ridge and looked at it for a while before walking back down, their boots wet with the field grass, their faces cool from the open air, the warmth of the stove waiting below. January came with rain. It came across the fields in long, visible sweeps, dark curtains of it moving through the valley from the west, arriving before you heard it, and then it hit the corrugated metal roof in a sound that changed the quality of being inside entirely. A drumming, steady and surrounding, as though the rain were a decision the world had made about the afternoon. It ran off the roof in a continuous pour and fell into the gravel track and found the low places in the field and filled them slowly. Through the kitchen window the willows bent and steadied and bent again. On the heaviest rain days the whole ridge disappeared into gray and the willows were just shapes, just suggestions of themselves, and the small room felt more enclosed and more particular and more safe. The stove was especially good on rain days. It ran hotter, or seemed to, the heat reaching every corner of the room in a way that felt deliberate, as though the space were small enough to be thoroughly and completely warm in a way a larger room could never quite manage. Lena made soup on rain days. She had brought a few things from the old kitchen, a heavy pot, a wooden spoon worn pale at the handle, a tin of good olive oil. With these things she made soup the way she always had, slowly and without consulting anything, adding things by instinct, tasting occasionally, adjusting without fuss. the lid left slightly ajar so the steam could find its way out and move gently through the room. The smell of the soup joined the wood smoke smell and the coffee smell that was always there in the walls by now, and the three of them together became something that was simply the smell of inside when outside was rain. Milo read more than he had in years. In the apartment there had always been something else, some small task sitting at the edge of an evening, some obligation that asked to be addressed before rest could begin. Here the evenings opened up quietly when the day's small work was done, and there was the sofa and the lamp and the book and the stove, and no particular reason not to simply be in them. He had forgotten this was available to him. The simple settling into a chair at the end of a day and reading until the eyes grew heavy. He read until his eyes grew heavy, which happened earlier than it used to, and then he would set the book on the floor and let his head fall back against the sofa and listen to the rain on the metal roof and the soft voice of the fire and the occasional shift of a log settling further into the heat. On the heavier rain evenings, they lit the candle on the window ledge above the stove, not because they needed more light, but because the candle changed what the lamp light felt like. The lamp was steady and clear and useful. The candle moved, its flame bending just slightly in the slow, warm currents near the glass, and then straightening again. Together, the two lights made the room feel softer, more enclosed, more like something cupped than something simply inhabited. Lena had found the candle holder in a drawer when they arrived, a small blue ceramic thing left by whoever had been here before, and she had set a candle in it the first rain evening without much thought. Now it was one of the small things the place depended on for itself. On those long rain evenings, after the soup and after the reading, they would sometimes do very little at all. Milo would lie along his end of the sofa with a cushion under his head, and Lena would sit at her end with her feet tucked under her, and the rain would drum on the roof, and the stove would hold its warmth, and the two lights would do what they always did. Sometimes they talked, low and unhurried, about nothing in particular. The plant, and whether it needed more water, the pebble on the ledge and where exactly along the track it had come from. Small things. The kind of conversation that happens in small rooms on rain evenings when there is nowhere to be and nothing to do. The kind that isn't really conversation at all, but simply the sound of two people comfortable in the same space. Eventually, one of them would say it was late, though it was rarely very late, and they would bank the stove for the night and blow out the candle and carry the warmth of the room up the step with them to the platform. Lena had a way of being in small spaces that Milo had always admired without quite having words for it. She moved through the kitchen without catching her hip on the counter edge or reaching for a shelf that turned out to be the wrong one. She remembered without effort where everything was kept, had a sense of which drawer and which shelf that seemed to precede any need to learn it. In the apartment, with its 4 rooms and its generous kitchen, This had been a modest and largely invisible quality. Here it was visible every day. Here it made the whole place feel arranged and purposeful. Every object in its right position, nothing displaced or uncertain. She had hung a length of undyed linen above the sleeping platform, a simple piece of fabric hemmed along its edges and strung on a length of wire between two small nails set into the low beam above. It did nothing practical. It just softened the space, gave the sleeping area a sense of being apart from the rest of the room without truly separating it, a suggestion of enclosure rather than a wall. In the mornings, the light came through it in a diffused and gentle way, and waking beneath it felt slower than waking in open air, felt like a more gradual and more generous return to the day. Milo had not thought to do anything like that. He was glad she had. The window ledge above the stove had acquired its own small collection without any arrangement being made. The driftwood was there first, worn to a silver-gray smoothness by water and years. Then, a smooth gray pebble from the gravel track, carried in one morning in Milo's coat pocket without any particular intention. Then the blue candle holder in its permanent position. Then a dried seed head from the field, its filaments pale and perfectly arranged around its stem, placed there by Lena one afternoon in passing, set down as a temporary thing and then never moved. These objects had gathered themselves. No one had curated them or planned for them. They were simply the things that had found their way to the ledge and stayed there, becoming part of the place in the quiet way that small objects do. February brought a change in the light before it brought any change in the warmth. The morning stripe across the kitchen wall was wider now, reaching a hand's span further toward the bookshelf than it had reached in December. The afternoons lasted a few minutes longer each day, the sky holding its pale blue a little further into the evening before conceding to gray. The willows on the ridge showed the first faint reddening at their tips, barely there, just a softening of the very highest branches that suggested the season was beginning to think about turning. Not turning yet, just the first thinking of it. The wood pigeon called more often in the mornings, and from a greater number of directions. They had been there nearly 2 months. The place no longer felt new, and the not feeling new was not a loss but an arrival. It felt settled in the way of something that has been in one position long enough to have a kind of weight and certainty. The mugs on the draining board and the rug in front of the stove and the bookshelf in its gap and the linen above the platform and the little trailing plant with its new tendril reaching toward the glass, these things were simply how things were now. There was no adjusting left. There was only the living of it, the daily, ordinary, deeply sufficient living of it. On a Sunday in late February, Milo lit the stove in the afternoon and they stayed in. The sky was low and soft, and even, not quite raining, the light flat and diffuse across the fields. a day that asked nothing of anyone, a day that offered itself simply, without condition, the way the best days do. Lena read on the sofa with a blanket over her legs and her feet tucked up beside her. Milo sat at the fold-down desk by the kitchen window and wrote letters on paper, actual letters with envelopes, to two old friends he had been meaning to write to for longer than he wanted to calculate. The stove settled into its steady, deep warmth. The plant reached a new tendril toward the glass. At some point, the afternoon simply crossed into evening, the lamp coming on as the window went gray, Milo sealing the letters into their envelopes and setting them by the door for the morning. Lena stretched her arms above her head, long and slow, and pulled the blanket a little higher. Outside, the fields had gone their evening gray, and the willows on the ridge were a dark line without detail. The stovepipe above the roof put out its thin and steady smoke. The soup pot sat clean and dry on the shelf. The two mugs sat on the draining board in the way they always sat. It was just a Sunday. Not different from other Sundays in any way that could be pointed to. And yet it had the quality of something whole in itself, not pointing toward anything, not waiting for something else to begin, just complete. On the heaviest rain night of the month, they went to bed before 9. The rain had been building since morning, arriving first as a thin and barely audible sound on the metal roof, and then thickening through the afternoon until by evening it was a full and constant drumming that filled the room with its presence. Not a loud sound exactly, but an encompassing one. A sound that covered the world outside in an even and unhurried way and made the inside feel held, contained, specific. The stove was packed with 2 good logs and running its deepest warmth. The lamp was off. Only the candle on the window ledge above the stove, its small flame completely still in the warm and windless air. They climbed the step to the sleeping platform. The duvet was thick and already warm from the heat the stove had been sending up toward the ceiling all day, and pulling it over was like being held by something very large and very gentle. Lena lay on her side facing the low window. Through the glass, the field was a moving darkness, the rain invisible out there but present everywhere, covering the willows and the track and the stone wall and the gravel in a single continuous sound. The frost was gone. The field was soft with rain. Milo lay on his back and looked at the linen above the platform. It moved very slightly, in some slow, warm current, rising from the room below. Barely a movement, just the faintest shift of the fabric in the warm air. The candlelight from the ledge below reached the ceiling in a dim and wavering way, not bright enough to see by, just bright enough to know it was there. The rain came on without pause or change, steady, even, without urgency. The stove ticked once, soft and low, settling into itself, and then was quiet. His arms were heavy, His legs were heavy, the good heaviness of a body that has been useful through a day and is now being asked only to rest. The duvet pressed warmly down. The pillow was cool at his cheek. He breathed out long and slow and felt the breath reach all the way down. Lena watched the rain-dark field through the low window. Nothing moved out there but the water running down the glass in slow and wandering lines. The candle behind her touched the underside of the linen in a soft and still way. She pulled the duvet a little higher without opening her eyes fully. The rain on the roof, steady and even, and there, a sound like something very large breathing slowly, a sound like the whole night settling its weight gently down. The candle on the ledge below, its flame barely moving, the warmth from the stove still present in the air, rising, still here. Milo's breathing had slowed, deepened, gone quiet. Lena breathed out, long, slow. The rain, the willows out there on the ridge, invisible and still, wet and still. The gravel track, the stone wall, the flat dark field, all of it resting under the rain, all of it held. The linen above the platform, still now, completely still. The candle, the warmth, the rain on the roof, the coffee maker on the draining board in the quiet kitchen below, waiting for morning. The willows waiting too. The field, the frost-soft earth beneath the rain, the seed head on the window ledge, the pebble from the track, all of it here, all of it resting. Just this small, warm place, under the rain, under the wide, dark sky. Just this.